Welcome, everyone. My name is Gary Ruchet, and together with Sarah DeHoff, we are co-faculty for the Wilmette Institute course, Bringing Consultation to the Workplace. Today, we are pleased to meet with Larry Miller. I've known Larry for many years, as he's in the Baha'i faith, and I've met him at his home in the United States. For the past 40 years, as I understand, he has worked to improve the performance of organizations and the skills of their leaders. His expertise is very practical, it's derived from a lot of actual experience, creating change in the culture of hundreds of organizations. In addition to that, he's published, as far as I know, 10, maybe more books, and he has a series of online learning courses on Udemy. So thank you, Larry, first of all, for meeting with us and ready to talk about your experiences with Baha'i consultation, with team development, with the faith. And let me just say, in Unit 3 of the course that we've prepared, we used a lot of your materials in Unit 3, and one statement is attributed to you, and that is, teams are becoming the new unit for business and constitute the basic unit for consultation. Can you tell us a little bit about why you have said that?
Sure. It's the reality. That's why I said it. Long ago, looking at the model of Baha'i administration that we've been given, there's the structural model, right? Which is local spiritual assemblies, national spiritual assemblies, and universal House of Justice, all comprised of 9 members. And in all cases, decisions are made by the group. They're made by the local spiritual assembly. And no one individual, although they may fulfill a role such as chairperson or treasurer or secretary, no one person has power. Power resides in the collective wisdom of the group. And there is great wisdom in that. And I think, without getting into too much about today's politics, but looking at the world today, one can see the problem of personal power and ego, and the striving for personal power and ego. And we just have to imagine, what the world would be like if that factor were removed from how we govern and decision-making processes throughout the world. You could talk for hours about all the problems with current structure and the culture of current governance, whether commercial or government. And the miracle of the Baha'i faith, in my mind, the biggest miracle of the Baha'i faith, is not normally what other people might think of as a miracle. It's the miracle of a transformation of our culture and a transformation of how we go about making decisions and governing and exercising power and authority. All that is revolutionized by the Baha'i faith. And to me, and I'm of course biased, everybody has their own thing they think is most important. But that is transformative, and it's transformative of culture at every level. And working in the business world, you look at the business world, and similarly to our world of government outside the business world, there have always been problems of personal power and governance. Now, which is not to deny the good qualities of individual initiative. I'm an entrepreneur. I've started my own company 3 times, and I've worked with entrepreneurial companies, and I get it. I get the wonderful power of somebody coming up with an idea, of a Facebook or a new computer system or software or whatever, and pursuing that and championing that. And there is great, force and power in that. But then that once it gains any form of success, it has to be balanced with not just personal and individual authority and creativity. It has to be balanced with collective wisdom. And there's collective wisdom, and I like that phrase. You know, I tend to use it a lot, of collective wisdom, and it simply means, and this doesn't matter whether it's in the Baha'i community or anywhere else. The fact is, if you get 6, 8, 9, 12 people together who have knowledge of work or knowledge of a community, and if somehow you can bring from their brains and their collective experience and put it together in the solution to a problem or to the development of a course of action. And if you can do that well, you can facilitate, and that is facilitation. If you can facilitate that process of bringing out of people the best of their wisdom and knowledge, you're going to come out with a better decision than if it was made by the one smartest person in the room. And the, you know, in the business world, the other power of group decision making, and you can call it a team or you can call it, I mean, names change, and that's just the clothing we wear, the name we're using, right? Teams are a name that work in the business world. People get it when you talk about teams because they watch sports and they understand how a football team or basketball team or whatever functions and the importance of teamwork, people working well together. You win when you work well together. People get that. So the word team is a useful term. But it's all about creating this collective wisdom in defining a course of action. But then it's also in the fact that people are committed to it. You know, people have ownership of it. And the courses of action tend to work when the people who have to do it are not just told to do it, but they thought of it and they participated in creating it. And that's the power of consultative decision making.
Yeah, yeah. That, it seems, I mean, from my own personal experiences, I mean, I've always worked in teams, and when I use consultation in that kind of a venue, this was always very powerful, and it was, you know, just a much better decision, much better implementation of the decision.
Right.
But let me just, you mentioned Baha'i community. Let's go to that just a little while, because is Baha'i consultation only for Baha'i communities? Or did Baha'u'llah teach that this idea of consultation is important for everybody, for the whole New World Order? And if that's true, what are the advantages of consultation for business? Why should business be interested in consultation? Maybe they never heard of it before. And what are the benefits of using consultation to a business? These are the sorts of things that we are discussing in the course, and it'd be interesting to hear what you think about that.
Yeah. First of all, you know, there is, I'll call it pure Baha'i consultation. And on a Baha'i local assembly, if you are solving a problem, part of the consultation process is referring to Baha'i principles as defined by Baha'u'llah and Abdul Baha, and you go to the writings, right? And you know, the writings on diversity, or the writings on unity, or the writings on you know, whatever, become relevant in the decision-making process. They should become relevant in the decision-making process. So that is one feature of Baha'i consultation that you can't just take and you can't just put in the corporate boardroom or the CEO's office and say, you know, refer to the Baha'i writings. They're not going to do that. But on the other hand, I've always advocated for corporations or any organization clearly defining their principles. what are our principles? What do we believe in? So I think a premise of consultation, whether in business or in the Baha'i community, is that you know what your principles are.
Hmm.
And obviously, in the Baha'i community, we can refer to the writings to derive those principles. But I think in the corporate world, you should have a set of principles, that you can also refer to in your decision making or problem solving.
That's really actually there was a discussion with another um, um, person who does a lot of work with consultation, and he mentioned that almost something similar to that that's not often mentioned in Baha'i forum, that we do indeed set the rules for consultation. That is something that we it's not in in stone, as far as I understand. And in a business environment, I think it's more or less the same thing. Um, so that's really very interesting. But let's think: how does a business implement a consultative process? Does it gather together a team every Monday afternoon? Does it cycle then through the consultative steps? Does it then reach a decision all in one consultative session? Or are there different consultative paths? One path for something simple that we just need to have a common vision and help to implement it. But there are also ideas that are much more complex, and that there may be different steps in the consultative process. At least that's how I see it. What do you think about that?
That's absolutely right. And let me kind of back up from issues of applying consultation let's ask the question: is consultation always the way you make decisions?
Hmm.
And the answer to that is no. And I think this is where people are always looking for formulas and rules so they don't have to think. And that's a real problem. And we have to think, okay? We have to use our intelligence. That's what God gave us, right? Now, the example, and it's sort of a silly example, but it does make the point. Let's say we're in a conference room and we say, okay, we all believe in consultation and group decision making, et cetera, et cetera. And now we smell smoke. The building is burning down. And now, what do? Well, we believe in consultation, right? So let's break into teams and let's brainstorm, all the different ways we could get out of the building. And let's, discuss the pros and cons of each of those and blah, 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 blah. Wrong. That's wrong. That's the wrong answer. The right answer is somebody knows where the exits are. Please stand up and in a loud, commanding voice, point us to the exits and let's line up and march out. Okay. There's a reason why for 1,000 years or so, the dominant style of decision making was command, meaning individual. The person who has the greatest knowledge of a subject makes the decision and others follow. Now, is that always wrong today? The answer is no, it's not always wrong. Sometimes it's right. And it's not just about level in the organization. The worker working on a machine in the factory, the machine suddenly starts to spit oil on the floor. Does that worker call for a team meeting or say, I'm going to wait till tomorrow morning when we have a team meeting and discuss it? No, that individual worker should be able to make a command decision to shut the machine down or however you solve that problem. That worker should be the world's greatest expert on that machine and how that machine functions.
Yeah.
And you should not need to call a meeting for that. There is a cost to consultation, and that cost is time and money. If you let that oil keep spitting out, that's both time and money.
Yeah.
That's That's dumb, right? I mean, the person should be able to make that decision. You may then have consultation, or you can call it problem solving, on why did that happen and
Mm-hmm.
how do we prevent that in the future, because it's not urgent. It's not, it's not the building burning down. It's not, an emergency case. The brain surgeon conducting brain surgery with the skull open
Mm-hmm.
does not engage in a lot of consultation. You trust that that brain surgeon has superior knowledge to the anesthesiologist, to the nurses, to other people. And because that person has superior knowledge and experience, they're going to exercise that. And you want them to exercise that. Now, there may be something where they might consult with other people on that surgery team, but you do respect that expertise and you design the decision making process. Every decision making process needs to be designed in a way that's relevant to that environment, to that situation,
Yeah.
whether it's brain surgery or a factory or software developers who are working online and located in 5 different countries.
Mm-hmm.
And that is increasingly a common model. They're not sitting in the same room, right?
Yeah.
They're having a once a week or maybe, every morning consultation virtually.
Uh-huh.
And the current pandemic we're going through has, forced people to move to that modality even more.
Yeah.
But so you have to, yeah, you have to think, and you have to think about what works best in an environment. And that gets, to your question of, well, when do we meet and who meets,
Mm-hmm.
right? And sometimes it makes more sense to have a subgroup. Maybe you have a management team. You have the president of the company, if you will, and he may have 8 or 10 members of his management team. But does that mean that every decision has to be made by all of those people? No, it doesn't. You have to ask, well, what types of decisions is it worth the cost and time of that whole group? And you need to think that through, and you need to design that. And maybe there are some decisions that may, to just take a typical corporation. You have people who create the product, engineering, if you will.
Yeah.
You have people who make it, manufacturing, and you have people who sell it. That's the most typical, simple workflow
Yeah.
in most companies: creating it, making it, and selling it, right? And sometimes it will make sense for manufacturing and the creative people, the people designing the product, to meet without the marketing people. There's a whole engineering area of design to manufacturing, where we used to design cars that were almost impossible to manufacture or created all kinds of problems in the manufacturing process. Well, every automobile company now understands that, and they involve the people who are designing, engineering the car, talking to the people who are manufacturing the car,
Mm-hmm.
because they know something about why things may be difficult to manufacture or easier to manufacture.
Yeah.
So, but the salespeople don't really need to be involved in every one of those decisions. So, so we have to think again about who's in the room. And I just like the simple thing: who knows, who cares, who has to act.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a good, simple way of thinking about who's in the room, right? Who has knowledge? Who cares about it? Somebody may have knowledge, not have knowledge, but they really do care because it impacts them.
Yeah.
So you want their ownership, and who has to take action? And you want people in the room who have to act on a decision. So that's just a real simple way of thinking about who's in the room of
Yeah.
decision making or consultation.
One of the other issues, I mean, we now are living in a time of the pandemic, which in many ways is becoming really the topic of the day for many of us. When we talk about consultation and in the social distancing we have right now, and in the way we're meeting people online, is this working in a consultative, let's say, paradigm? Is it something that you feel can be done virtually. It doesn't have to be something that we all sit in the same room and start off with, or the prayer or whatever. Or is it really quite efficient consultative these days, using and doing it online?
Gary, I think God works in mysterious ways. And, you mentioned Black Lives Matter and the pandemic. And in this country, we have some other crises that are going on that we don't really need to get into, but have to do with how we govern,
Yeah.
right? And I think, sometimes things have to be shoved in your face in order for you to deal with them, as opposed to them sort of being in the background, somewhere, and we don't pay attention to them. And I think, the pandemic, for example, in this country, is forcing people to think about the realities of our healthcare system.
Mm-hmm.
And, while, every crisis is sort of a tragedy, but the worst tragedy is if it does not force you to confront reality, to confront what's really going on and why is it going on.
Mm-hmm.
And, doing some root cause analysis, right?
Yeah.
For those who don't know, the idea of root cause analysis is extremely simple. It's what a 3-year-old does.
Mm-hmm.
When the 3-year-old says, mommy says you can't go outside today, and the 3-year-old says, why? And mommy says, because it's raining. The 3-year-old says, well, why is it raining? And, and you can keep going, right?
Yeah.
Why? Then mommy eventually says, because I said so. That's why, right? But root cause analysis is, when you say, oh, okay, there's this problem with the behavior of police. Well, it's worth saying why.
Yeah.
And you may say, well, because they're prejudiced or because they don't value Black lives. And then it might be worth saying why. And it's worth saying, 3 or 4 whys and go deep, go more into the roots of what is the cause of the problem. And I think that's a very good thing. And I think there's a lot of that going on right now.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, I don't know whether to call it consultation because it might be confused with what we do in a local spiritual assembly. And it's certainly not the same thing. But there is a process of gaining collective wisdom, and there is a process of sharing experiences. And, in our own Congress here, in the Senate, there's one Black Republican senator from South Carolina. And, of course, he's conservative because he's part of the Republican Party and so forth. But, he got up and he gave a speech and he, told the senators,
Mm-hmm.
and it was very powerful. He said, in the last year, I've been stopped by the police 7 times in Washington.
Yes. Yes.
And I'm a United States senator. And the last time I was stopped, the reason they said I was stopped was because I didn't turn on my turn signal soon enough.
Mm-hmm.
Has anybody else been stopped and told, well, you just didn't turn on your turn signal soon enough? I've never heard of that. I've never been stopped for that. Come on, face up to what's going on here.
Yeah.
And many people will deny that there is racism, but that, for that one Black senator who is a conservative to get up and explain that to his fellow senators, that's a very good thing. It's not a good thing that it happened, but it's a good thing that people are hearing it.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of hearing going on right now. And consultation should be 9 parts, listening and 1 part talking.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of, listening. Maybe there's too much talking, but there's a lot of people are listening and trying to understand. And for a lot of people, for example, that in reaction to the phrase Black Lives Matter, they'll say, well, all lives matter.
Mm-hmm.
And Okay, I get that. Yes, it's true. All lives matter. We get that. But the best answer to that I've seen is to go to your Bible and go to Luke. I think it's Luke 15, but I might be. And it's the parable of the lost sheep.
Mm.
And the story is that the shepherd has 100 sheep and one gets lost, and he leaves the 99 sheep and goes to find the one sheep.
Mm-hmm.
And Jesus is asked, well, but what about the 99? He says, well, the 99 weren't lost, you know. And that's why, and the phrase Black Lives Matter, a lot of people don't understand the reality of the black senator getting stopped 7 times. That's why Black Lives Matter, because you have to confront the reality of the difference.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
difference. And the moment you say, well, all lives matter, what you're saying is there's no difference. Yes, there is a difference. There's the
Mm-hmm.
lost sheep. Okay. So, there's a lot of learning going on. And I think, that's going on about healthcare. It's going on about our political system.
Mm-hmm.
It's going on about racial issues. All that's good. It's all good. And I'm a teacher and practitioner of lean management, Toyota production system.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that is, there are two critical principles of lean management. And one is respect for people, and the other is continuous improvement. And those two principles go hand in hand, right? And the idea of continuous improvement is the very simple idea of every day. When I was involved at Honda in Marysville, Ohio, the first president of Honda American Manufacturing had been a Formula One engine designer, and he was now president. And he always talked about the racing spirit. And what that meant was the engine that's winning today will lose tomorrow. The car that's winning today will lose tomorrow if you don't do anything.
Yeah.
You can't say, "Oh, we're the win." And it's true in football. I used to work for a professional quarterback, and then every Monday morning, regardless of whether the team won or lost, the team is in the locker room looking at films and saying, "How could we do it better? What worked? What didn't work? How do we improve?" And no week goes by when they don't do that. If they don't do that, they are certainly going to lose, right? Because everybody's learning from everybody else, and you must be engaged in continuous improvement. And I think that's an important lesson of life. And I think it's a lesson of consultation. The idea that we have no problem is a wrong-headed idea. It isn't, quote, what's a problem? It's how can we get better? How can we improve? And I think that's a lifelong lesson for how we live our lives. As an individual human being, Baha'u'llah said to take account of yourself each day, right? Well, what does that mean? Well, what that means to me is I should be every day asking myself how I can be better.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as perfect as I am, and I'm really quite perfect, there's probably some way I can still be better. Anyway,
Not just you, all of us.
of course.
Okay, getting back to something very distinct business oriented. How does consultation impact hierarchical structure of business?
Right.
In the ex-Soviet Union where I live now, this was a hierarchical society, and it was really hierarchical, really. Those at the bottom had no power whatsoever. Those at the top did everything. I mean, the head of a company in the Soviet Union literally decided where a person would live, decided where they would go for a holiday, decided if they needed to be sent to Siberia. It was all this super hierarchical system. And we still feel a little bit about that in this environment here in Ukraine, although the young generation, thanks to God, is beginning to adapt to new realities. But in a business environment, that hierarchical was kind of the standard for many years, at least up in the 20th century. And now we're switching to something else that really is less hierarchical and perhaps more consultative.
Sure, sure. And you know, when you think about the Baha'i system, you have local assemblies, and then you have a national assembly, and then you have the House of Justice. You have basically three levels, right? Now, there are committees, you know, you form committees for a teaching project or a training institute or whatever. But the real decision-making process goes through three levels,
Mm-hmm.
and it's global. That's quite remarkable,
Yeah.
right? Now, why can that work? I mean, how can that work? Why don't we have a committee to tell the local assembly what they should be discussing next week? And the answer to that is that we trust them. We trust them because we trust they believe in the same principles, right? We also trust that they are the world's greatest experts in their community, and they're consulting on their community. Now, you know, this is the same principle as if you go to Honda, for example, or Toyota, but I'll talk about Honda. You know, one of their Honda isms is the world's greatest experts are on the spot, have their hands on.
Mm-hmm.
In Toyota language, this is called going to the Gemba, right? Which means on the spot, it means where the work gets done, right? And this is part of that principle of respect for people, right? The workers doing the work should be the world's greatest experts in their work. If they're not the world's greatest experts in their work, whose fault is that? Mm-hmm. It's management's job to cause them to be the world, to provide the training, to provide the knowledge, to provide the data, the information, to be the world's greatest experts in their work. Managers should design a system, right? And a system that includes respect for people and continuous improvement. If you're going to have teams engaging in continuous improvement, they have to have the information. They have to have the facts, the data, right? Very often in our corporations, the data systems were designed to push information up, right? Yeah. To the top. On the assumption, well, they're the decision makers, right? Mm. Well, maybe on some things, but if you want the workers at the front line to be making decisions and improving their process, they have to have the data. So we have to design our systems for that. You know, there's also just a huge cultural thing here, and there, you know, there's sort of talk in this, and there's sort of systems, right? There are things that make things real in an organization. And just one more Honda story that I think is a really useful story. You know, when I was up there once, I was being toured around the manufacturing plants. There are 4 of them there. And there was a woman, her name is Sandy, it doesn't matter, who was a public relations person. Mm-hmm. And she was, I'll say 45 years old, somewhere, you know, mid-career, middle-aged. Mm-hmm. And she had joined Honda about 2 years earlier. And she described to me how what it was like her first day and how she joined the organization. And this is the system. This is not like a one-off. This is the way it works. She, you know, and you just imagine, you know, she was already a professional public relations person. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure the first day she arrived on the job, she looked good. You know, I'm sure she had a nice outfit on. Her makeup was good and her earrings were nice and her hair was done. And I'm sure she looked good because she's a public relations person, for heaven's sake. And the first day she arrived, she was handed her uniform that said Sandy over here and Honda over here. And she was assigned to welding, to work on the line. Yeah. And for 6 weeks, she worked on the line. And I asked her, now we're like 2 or 3 years later, right? And I said, Sandy, well, how did you feel about that? And she said, honestly, I didn't like it. It scared the hell out of me. You know, it was hard. And welding is actually kind of a dangerous operation, you know. You got hot stuff there. And I said, well, yeah, it's like 2 years later now, looking back on it, you know, was that a right thing to do or a wrong thing to do? And she said it was absolutely the right thing. And I said, why? And she said, because I learned respect.
Mm-hmm.
I learned to respect the world's greatest experts who are on the spot.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the Baha'i system is designed for that. The world's greatest experts who are on the spot are the local spiritual assembly, right? They're not, you know, in Wilmette, Illinois. They're not the National Assembly. Now, there are some things that the National Assembly is expert in and may set guidelines for and so forth. But in terms of, you know, where we're going to have meetings and what we're going to do at meetings, that shouldn't come from Wilmette, Illinois, for heaven's sakes. Don't bother them. You know, I've noticed this. A lot of Baha'is have a tendency, and it's because they sort of lack, you know, confidence and trust in their own abilities or in the ability of their local community. They want to go to the National Assembly for everything. What should we do about this? What should we do about that? Well, good God. I mean, you know how many assemblies there are? Don't burden them.
Uh-huh.
You know, I mean, they have enough problems of their own without, you know, asking them every detailed question. We have to be able to make decisions on the spot where the work gets done. And that's how the Baha'i system is designed. But it requires trust. You know, it requires trust and it requires respect.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, those are important cultural characteristics of our future world order, whether it's in, you know, larger societal governance or whether it's in our business.
Mm-hmm. I think I remember somewhere Shoghi Effendi said that in one subject, I can't really remember which, that we should even trust is so far that even allow them to make a mistake, because really we can't be controlling them and something along those lines. All in my words, of course, but.
Sure.
But yeah, this trust is a big key in every little thing. The situation in the United States is so toxic in the way people react to each other, it seems. And in other discussions about consultation, we talked about, you know, the difficulty for people to go into a meeting and to give their opinion, and for the other side of the opinion, for example, to listen carefully, to be able to find an agreement, because some people are so fixed on the fact that they, you know, what they feel and what they're doing is the best decision and they don't want to give up on that. They want to be a little bit competitive in the way they deal with other people. So let's say we do a consultative session in a team in business, and we see this kind of a difficulty between people where both are very strong-willed and we really want to come to some kind of a common decision. Is there a way out, you know, that we could get out of this gracefully and into something that brings us to a unity and a going together in collective unity?
There's not a simple, you know, answer to that, Gary. You know, speaking of the pandemic,
Yeah.
somebody on one of the news shows, you know, was pointing out we are engaged in the largest social experiment in the history of humankind. And that's true. I mean, no psychology department at any university could have planned this experiment,
Mm-hmm.
right? But we are conducting a massive social experiment. And you know, there's this whole issue of, you know, in the United States, and there are lots of things, you know, on Facebook where people are ranting and raving about freedom not to wear a mask, you know, and they want to talk about their rights, you know, because they never actually study what the word rights means, you know, and what the limits of rights are.
Yeah.
We have police to stop you when you're not wearing a seatbelt, by the way, and lots of other. You can't drive 100 miles an hour through a school zone. Your rights are not limited, have never been limited, and you can't even go into a Walmart without a shirt on and shoes on.
Mm-hmm.
So and there's this sort of insane idea of 100% liberty. Well, okay, social experiment. We're learning. Everybody, pay attention. We're learning there are limits on what you think your rights are.
Mm-hmm.
Let's all learn about what rights really means and what the limits of that are. Good social experiment. And now we have the social experiment. We have politicians in certain states, I won't name them, who are sort of appealing to the lowest common denominator of this idea of ultimate, freedom and liberty, and you can't tell people what to do, and everybody can do what they want.
Mm-hmm.
And now, it's really wonderful. Now you watch the data, right? And if you're watching the data on where the virus is increasing versus decreasing, it's increasing in all those states where the governors were hesitant to impose some restrictions on liberty,
Mm-hmm.
right? In New York, and Governor Cuomo was really excellent about this in terms of appealing to people to be disciplined.
Yeah.
And follow the guidelines and always wear your mask and, so forth and so on. And New York has gone, in the right direction in terms of the reduction. And now Florida and Texas and other states where they didn't have the discipline. There's a lot to be said for discipline. There's a lot to be said for people behaving in a way for the common good, and people are learning about, well, wait a minute, maybe it makes more sense to be thinking about the common good than be thinking about pounding my chest about my personal rights.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe my personal rights are really not, my personal rights may result in me personally dying or my mother dying or my, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think there's this huge learning thing going on. And it's collective, it's global learning. I mean, isn't that wonderful? We talk about, and I know a lot of Americans, they scream and they hear the word New World Order, the phrase New World Order.
Uh-huh.
But whether you like it or not, there's a New World Order. And that New World Order is global learning going on. And I wouldn't exactly call this consultation in the Baha'i sense, but in maybe in the bigger perspective of things, it's sort of a form of consultation in where, you can look at Brazil or you can look at Germany. Just for example. And, I'm a great believer in data. This is sort of a core of Toyota production system or lean management. You focus on the facts, the scientific method, right? The scientific method is to look at the data. Well, I know there are a lot of people watching TV who never really studied a graph in their life. They've never really understood a graph. Well, today, and your people may be watching this a year from now, and they may forget this reality of today.
Yeah.
But the graph today, if you take, all the European countries, for example, and the rate of infection,
Mm-hmm.
they all went up, and then they all went down, and then there's sort of a smooth curve at the bottom. And the United States zoomed up, and then we sort of went level, and now we're zooming up again. Right? And some people, well, we have more people. That's why. Or we're doing more testing. That's why. Well, no, because it's a per capita. It's per 1,000 people or 100,000 or whatever the number is. And people are saying, "Oh, well, what exactly does that mean?" And people are actually learning on a global basis to look at a graph and look at data and try to understand what it means. And I say, great. It's unfortunate we needed a pandemic, and hundreds of thousands of deaths for people to learn to study the data and be fact-based. But that's what's happening. So that may be off our subject of consultation, but
Actually, I don't think it is. There is a quotation from the Universal House of Justice where some consultation is just groups getting together and coming to a kind of a consensus or discussing these kinds of issues together without coming at a concrete decision. They mentioned it in one of the quotations. But okay, you talk a lot about facts and data, and it's obvious that you like facts and data. I come from an
That should not be unique to me, by the way. That should be a quality of humankind, as
okay.
opposed to something that's unique in any way to Larry Miller.
Okay, well, in my life, I also had to deal with facts and data in terms of international development in different countries around the world. But now here's the but. I think that when we talk about consultation, Baha'i consultation, I mean, which is really, not so different from other ways in which people address these issues. Um, Dialogue is something that's not too dissimilar to what we do in consultation. And so what I sometimes think about for myself is that yes, objectively I have been trained and I am able to look at facts and data, but there's something else that sparks something within me. It's a kind of a subjective type of a feeling. Maybe it comes from a kind of a meditation. What if it comes from what they call these days mindfulness? Is there a role for mindfulness in decision making, group decision making, consultation type activities in business, or do they kind of look at that as something that should be done with you guys over on the religious side of things?
Gary, one of the difficulties is language.
Mm-hmm.
And we get caught up in what people think words mean, like consultation, like mindfulness, like spirituality, lots of words like that. And I think we have to always sort of step back and think about what the reality really is versus how people may react to a word.
Mm-hmm.
I know that in a lot of corporate settings, if you say, well, let's pursue mindfulness, they'll go, oh, God, he read another book. Get out of here. Really, there's sort of the fad of the day and the word of the day and, all that stuff. Look, I think we need to pursue wisdom. And I think, wisdom is informed by a lot of different things. Wisdom is informed by the knowledge of history, what's happened in the past. Wisdom is informed by the facts of today, looking at that graph, if you will. and wisdom is informed by principles, by the principle of honesty and trustworthiness and valuing diversity and lots of things, and meditating on those, if you will, or thinking deeply about them, however whatever language you want to use, I don't care. But we should meditate on the situation, right? What is the problem we're trying to solve, or what are we trying to improve? And what are the facts about that? What are the causes of police misconduct, if you will? And what are our principles? What do we believe in?
Mm-hmm.
Have we learned anything from history about that? And then let's think about going forward. Let's think collectively. Let's share our thoughts, brainstorm, if you will, about how we move forward. And let's try to reach some collective commitment about how we move forward. In humility, not on the assumption that that's going to be the end point, but rather that that's going to represent progress. It's going to be a step forward.
Mm-hmm.
And once we watch the data, we may come back and say, no, that didn't work, or let's try something else. And I think a healthy culture and a healthy system and a healthy human being is not looking for the end state out of one decision, but is looking for progress. I think this is a problem in our Congress. They always want to develop a bill, a healthcare system, if you will. That will be the final thing. We'll never have to think about it again. Well, wrong. You're going to fail at that. How about we just think about what will improve it?
Mm-hmm.
We'll move it forward. And then realize we'll watch how that works, and then we'll improve it again. That's what the way any management process or governance process. I mean, that is the way it should work. So, and that does require some humility.
Yeah.
And I think, too often our politicians or corporate executives are arrogant, and arrogance is the enemy of learning. When you're arrogant, you want to believe you have the right answer, and you want to sort of sell people that I know. Only I can solve this problem. That's always wrong, right? So anyway, I think consultation requires humility, and maybe that's part of mindfulness, if you will.
Yeah. Larry, we've been going for about 1 hour. Probably it's enough. And it's been really good. And I bet that all the participants who will listen to this will be very interested to hear more from you. I'll tell them to go to Udemy. There's lots more of you in Udemy. And of course, we haven't seen you much in the EBBF recently, but it should be nice to see you. You must be too busy doing other things. But thank you very much. Maybe if you have one last kind of thing you'd like to tell us about the consultation before we sign off, and maybe we give you a few more minutes, that would be great. But thankful for all that you've done and said so far.
Well, if I have a closing thought, it's, right now, at least, from the perspective of the United States, we have at least 3 overlapping crises going on. A political crisis, the police situation, an economic crisis, the pandemic. I think that's 4, actually. And I think, what our job is, we can easily become depressed, paralyzed, right, by the overwhelming nature of these crises. But I think our job is to meditate on the crises and meditate on the root causes and consult on how to improve things, And I think, just thinking about the racial, issue in the United States, and I know, and this is the blessing of the racial Black Lives Matter crisis, if you will. In every company now, there is consultation going on about, are we doing our part?
Mm-hmm.
Are we doing the right things? I don't think any corporate executive team is saying it's not our problem.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a really good thing. And simply, we make progress by asking questions, Part of consultation is asking questions. So everybody, from wherever they sit in their own way, are asking questions about what can we do to improve the lives of African Americans in this country, or diversity. And it's not just in this country. I mean, there's a global thing going on about diversity, right?
Yeah.
And, it may have been the global conversation. I know it's going on in Europe, and it's going on in Japan. Mm-hmm. It's going on around the world. And that's a great thing. And I think we should, out of the crisis, be happy that there's the crisis that's forcing people to think. And think deeply and consult together about how do we move forward. So I'm optimistic, and I'm in a way thankful for all these crises. I hope COVID-19 doesn't kill me. Trying to keep alive. But I recognize the value in how the crises move us forward towards a new world order.